One of the greatest challenges in the startup industry is to build a strong tech organization. But an even greater challenge is to scale it up to a large number of people. Dirk, who is the CTO of sennder, and Stephan, who is our CTO of Project A, were facing exactly that challenge at the beginning of the year at sennder. Today they will share their experiences, learnings, and maybe some watch-outs of the last 9 months. And they will also tell us the secret how they managed to successfully scale a tech organization from 25 people to an incredible number of 120 people within that time. All right, everyone. Enjoy the session, and Dirk and Stephan, the stage is yours.
Thanks a lot, Tobias, for the introduction. Let's see whether we share secrets. I think the first thing I'm going to do is to share my screen to show you the presentation, and we are ready to go. All right.
Sure. I will get started with the session. So we split the session in 2 parts. We'll take the first part and Stephan the second part. So yeah, as Tobias said, we're going to talk a little bit about our journey this year, how to grow the tech organization at sennder. But before we jump into that, probably a good starting point will be to talk a little bit about sennder, because not many people might know sennder. At least before I joined, I didn't know sennder. So I want to give you a brief intro to sennder. If you go to the next slide. So sennder is basically a digital freight forwarder. So we're in the logistics space. We're a startup based in Berlin. We're about by now 600 people in multiple offices, including Paris, Berlin, Madrid, and other European cities. And our main value proposition is being if you think of it in a simplified way, if you click again, Stephan, just click through. We're basically a two-sided platform, if you want. So on the one side, you have shippers, enterprise, mid-cap, small, medium enterprises. And on the other side, you have carriers, mostly smaller carriers, 1 to 10 trucks, family-owned. And we have quite many of those in Europe, around 400,000. So our job is to connect shippers with carriers. And you can think of it as like booking an Uber, but for trucks, right? So we're basically trying to solve with technology the matchmaking between shippers and carriers. We're different value propositions on the shipper and carrier sides. On the shipper side, we definitely aiming at a cost reduction. So being able to ship loads at a lower cost than other competitors can do that. And we've proven that quite a lot in the last years. Operational visibility or supply chain visibility is one of the big topics that we're trying to solve and also offering to shippers. And a midterm topic is CO2 emission reduction. So with our technology, we aim to optimize and therefore optimize loads, optimize routes, and therefore reduce CO2 emissions. On the carrier side, it's the other side of the platform. We're basically helping carriers to increase their margin, their utilization of their fleet. Cash flow, which is a big topic for carriers, is something we're looking into. How can we enable them to have higher cash flows, and then cost reduction in general on the fleet. One of the biggest cost drivers is fuel, but also the trucks themselves, and we have sort of extra services that we offer here in order to help carriers reduce that. So at the core, it's basically a set of products that we're building, which we gave funny names: octopus, orcas, and otters. I don't know why. That was before my time. And we now have one new product, which is a mobile app, and you can see the naming convention doesn't fit anymore. I named that product, so I couldn't come up with a better name. It's called On The Road. But basically that product suite is what we call senOS, and senOS is sort of the core mission that we have as a tech organization in sennder, to build a product suite that enables what I just said on the shipper and carrier side, the different optimizations. If you go to the next slide. So this whole talk is about scaling a tech organization. So I guess the first question would be, so why scaling? Right. If you go to the next slide, we started off with I would say, MVP product that brought sennder quite far. We're now at a few $100 million revenues, and the product that we built is supporting that business quite well. But we are pretty much, if you think about it, a tech-enabled business until now, or until the end of last year. we're now moving, if you look at our journey, we're now moving into more a smart logistics ecosystem. What I mean by that, really leveraging data to do all these optimizations, to really optimize the logistics business. That's sort of our plan for 2020. And then in the long term, our 3 to 5 year plan is really to build what we call logistics OS. So that's where the name stems from, sennder-OS or sennder-OS. So our aim is really to be on the desktop of ideally every carrier, every shipper, to use our products, our platform to operate the logistics business. And obviously, if you're not deep in logistics, that might sound simple, but there's quite a few challenges to be solved to turn that current non-digital business into a really digital business and really be able to provide those optimizations and really make this a complete different industry. So what we're actually trying to build here is not trivial. It's pretty complex. If you click through, it's probably not exactly looking like this, right? This is a piece of hardware, but I guess if you compare to the challenges on the software side and on the product side, it comes close to it. While at the same time, that's our tech team. That's how it looked like sometime last year, right? So that's a pretty sizable team. Obviously, the team did an awesome job in building the current MVP product, but it's not going to cut it if you want to really disrupt the logistics industry. So the challenge here is to really scale the organization to something like that looks more like this. Obviously, a slide, it says here no exaggeration, but yeah, I mean, we're looking at a sizable scaling of the organization in order to build all the products and really deliver value on the shipper side, on the carrier side, and make sennder successful as a business. So when we started this year, we asked ourselves the question, okay, how do we get from this sizable awesome team to this big awesome team, and how do we do that without causing any problems or any destruction in the running business, and also being successful with this whole scaling. So that's what this talk is basically about. And if you go to the next slide, I guess the main trick here is spending some time upfront thinking about how does the right side look like? How should it look like before you start scaling? So give yourself some time and then start building it. But we will talk about these learnings, and these learnings will be about spending time on those topics before you really run into some sort of chaos situation. And Stephan will talk about these points, and I will talk about the learnings, the things that didn't go well, because not everything went well, obviously, at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'm handing over to Stephan to talk about these.
Thanks a lot, Dirk. Then before we speak about like the learnings themselves, let's maybe have a quick look into how we grow, or what was our growth journey in like kind of nutshell. What you see here as a graph is actually the development of the tech staffing at sennder, starting already May last year until now, what you see on the right side here. We will put a couple of, let's say, marks on that to see and highlight like important points here. So the first one was more or less the part when sennder and I, or as a Project A, started to collaborate even more. But also one important topic that came up directly from the business was a post joint venture that sennder is doing. So actually having an agreement with the Poste Italiana saying, hey, look, we are going to do all of your transportation business from 2020 on. It was the first time, and after we joined, the first next step, logical one was, okay, let's look for a CTO, and let's find somebody who's actually able to bring us to that journey. Dirk signed, luckily, so that has been like a relatively short amount of time in between. I think our search was also like pretty good. Yeah. So Dirk joined then in the middle of February of 2020 already. Then it became interesting because then the let's say cadence of events is getting much higher. So the first thing, and I think this is also something that we will share as a learning later, is we had like an agile coach and delivery joining the leadership team, which was before mainly Dirk and me, now added this with like another person here. And we also had like first contractors joining already shortly after March. So that we are not just relying on our own hiring and growth, but actually get people on board here as well. Another puzzle piece was like the first version of a sennder tech playbook was like published or created. And I know I can remember that Dirk actually spent like a lot of time in the beginning here in writing that version. And I can already tell now it's still guiding us today, acting as some kind of North Star. Where do we want to go with the tech organization? How do we work together and so on? Next to that, and I think this was also some let's say trigger point that actually pushed our growth quite a bit. The COVID lockdown happened here in Germany, which means that a couple of companies that have been affected by COVID, like tourism or travel companies, suddenly set all of their, not all of their, but like a huge or good amount of engineering capacity on Kurzarbeit, so short workage. And these people immediately, I would say, started to look around and then start to look for some kind of other opportunity to work with. This gave us a chance to actually hire like a couple of really strong and good people that actually help to shape our foundation. The next event that we highlighted here is like a principal engineer joined. The reason for that, it will also be explained later, but getting a stronger ownership on the tech side here, as you see that we had to handle like that growth phase here already. Next point, the first engineering manager joined as well. Yeah, so the point of saying, okay, look, we are starting to build our leadership team and extend it even more by being able to manage that increased amount of colleagues that are now working with and for sennder. In the meantime, also business-related things happened. Yeah, so sennder actually acquired Everroad, some kind of digital freight forwarder in France, like a very similar model. We had a point of that post joint venture was like officially launched. So sennder is currently like taking all of the truck logistics in or like the logistics transports from Poste Italiane, handling that via the platform. So that was like a challenging thing in between as well. Last but not least, on that side here, the final tech or the final org model have been in place, and that heavily related to what Dirk was writing down in the very beginning of the journey. So actually, all of the steps that we have done here in between actually ended up in that final org model being in place, having the right staffing, having the right structure, and so on and so forth. That means in October, or shortly before October, our tech leadership was complete. So then we actually continued in terms of like staffing the teams that still have capacity needs. And it's something that is still ongoing here. And last but not least, at least on our side, also the Uber Freight Europe acquisition. So seeing like the journey of what is it here when Dirk joined middle of February until now. I think that was like a pretty packed road that we actually took, and all of that still with the part of like handling that acquisition, handling that the huge amount of transport to be done or to be managed, and growing the organization and making sure that the organization that we actually build is carrying what you want to do. And if you do something like that in a let's say in a not proper way, then stuff like that is like a potential outcome. Yeah, so a lot of chaos and a lot of things that are actually going wrong. So our main point is this happens if you don't think upfront about some things that should be done right from the very beginning. And one of the things, the number one thing that we see is definitely taking the time at the very beginning to think. Yeah, so often if you start such a journey, we start to act immediately. But taking the time to think, write down the stuff that you thought about and the structure, and that should be something like way of working, like principle values, but also what kind of roles do I want to have? How should my organizational structure look like in the future? And if I speak of the future, then I'm referring back to the small picture that we saw in the very beginning, like the 5-person or 6-person team in the beginning, next to that huge amount of people that you're heading for. And you at the very beginning should build and really think about how do I want to manage that whole group of people, which are not 5, but maybe 120. The second point, get the right people on board as soon as possible. I mean, we saw in that journey that we got like a agile coach and a deal really pretty early on. I would say that was like the first and really good hire or get the person on board that Dirk did. We had the principal engineer joining relatively fast. So getting these people on board will definitely help you, because it will allow you to focus still on the right thing, but also to let them take care of some parts that are going on in the organization that need to be taken care of. And what we would actually see definitely is like the Agile Code principal engineer architect role. So having people like that on board. Engineering manager is definitely like the next one. And then we added here like the chief of staff position, which means that there's a person who is, let's say, taking care of all of the operational stuff. So if you see the relation or the work that Dirk and did at sennder, that was the role of a CTO in such a company, not necessarily being strongly connected to tech-related stuff, but pretty much on the one hand to strategy-related things, to also, let's say, working a lot with the management team, so the founder team, to let's say, put things in the right direction here. And the chief of staff person is actually one that helps you to execute in the other directions, not like the management layer, but to really make sure that stuff get done. Whatever it is and whatever is necessary, that person can actually take care of that. The third one, organic hiring only, is too slow. So if you just rely on hiring, you're not going to make it. I think this is like a pretty important learning. So ideally, you find short and long-term partners that you can work with relatively fast, and also in the beginning. So that can be contractors, that can be freelancers, any agency, whatever fits for you. You find somebody ideally, but you should also be pretty careful in terms of like choosing the right people, and also putting it on a long-term relationship, because what we typically see is that contractors tend to stay like at least for a year or even longer within your company. And so also keeping like the right balance between you getting external capacity on board, but also having, let's say, enough internal capacity and hiring fast enough is pretty important here. The fourth point, perfect the right process, the right time. So it doesn't really make sense to think about like how do I actually set up my whole this definition process of any tech decisions if I'm just a small organization. So the points that we see here, being if you're in the growth phase, definitely being right or should be right is a hiring process. Yeah, so that's definitely something that must work, because otherwise you can always just rely on the external capacity, but you also need to be able to staff your company or your teams by your own people. This highly correlates with the second point, like a smooth onboarding. Yeah, so I mean, getting people on board is maybe relatively easy, but having like a smooth onboarding for them and getting them efficient in a pretty fast and good way, that is not easy, and it actually causes a lot of pain. So thinking about that early and like optimizing that on the way, definitely recommended. Then also Agile at scale. I mean, if you speak about 120 people, that means not just like 2-3 teams, but a lot. So already starting to think about how do I going to manage that? How do I organize my planning? How do I align with all of the different stakeholders? And to be honest, there are a lot of things that need to be aligned. It's definitely something that would then come in a third step. Last but not least on that list, thinking about how do you take tech decisions in your organization. So having something like an architecture board, even if it sounds like pretty corporate, that can definitely help. And very fast or very important learning here as well. The expectations for 100 plus team is pretty much different compared to smaller team sizes. Because the point is here, people say, hey, look, you have all of that amount of people. What are they doing the whole time? So being transparent and manage that expectation properly in all directions and also permanently, it's definitely something that you shouldn't underestimate. And I think this is also what Dirk was mainly doing, to put things into the right perspective the whole time, so that everybody understands that we are in a growth phase, that we are in a journey, and that's going step by step. And everybody must know that. There is no way around it. All right, so these are like the 5 points from my side, and Dirk is now going to continue with the learnings that we had.
Yeah, so thanks, Stephan. So maybe just go to the next slide already. Yeah, so obviously not everything was perfect, right? And when we so far, right, on this journey, and we're always trying to challenge ourselves and see what can we do better. So Stephan mentioned that the hiring process is probably the first thing that you need to fix if you really want to scale the engineering organization in a short amount of time. So if you come from a team with, let's say, 10 internal developers, and I think that's roughly what we had, with a few externals, but having externals interview is a bit of awkward also for the candidates. So you have to think about, if you have 10 people and I want to hire so and so many people per month, you can do the math, how many interviews you need, right? So first of all, you need to have the right process in place and design it in a smart way that you don't waste time of your developers interviewing the wrong people at the end. So one option is to obviously do certain tech challenges that you give as homework, or you can outsource this, right? There's companies like, which we are now trying out, Korat, right? They offer you sort of a complete offboarding or outsourcing of the tech interview process, right? And then you can pick it up from there and you only get sort of the good candidates. But the other problem is simple capacity, right? So if you have 10 people, and even if you only interview the good candidates, how do you do that? You have to really think about that, because you can't occupy your dev team to 50% with interviews, because then they don't build any software anymore, right? So this is something that you definitely have to invest in early on, and also think about, okay, what kind of candidates do I need in the future, and how do I design the interview process? So one example in our case is that we haven't had a system design stage, right? If you look at any big tech company, you have a coding challenge and you have even multiple coding or tech interviews, but like a system design interview where you test, for example, lead or senior engineers on their architecture capabilities is something that where we missed in the early stages, right? And in our case, we're now moving from a monolith to a sort of microservice, Kafka, event-driven architecture. You need these people at some point in the company, right? So you need to design your process also to fit those profiles, right? So we probably wasted some time and effort by not investing in that process early on enough. And it's quite some work, to be honest. Also having standardized interview catalog, right? If you have a lot of new people joining, they're all going to interview the next generation candidates. But if you're not aligned on what is the sort of expectation to a candidate per level, what questions do we ask in an interview, and what does a good outcome look like, and what does a bad outcome look like of an interview question, then you're not aligned and you might hire the wrong people, right? So having a sort of a standardized interview catalog, standardized exercises, standardized coding challenge really helps a lot in hiring the right team and the right people. Next slide. Similar to that, engineering standards. It depends a bit on your architecture, I think. But in our case, as I said, we have a Python Django sort of monolith, like probably a modular monolith, if you want. We were good on coding standards and this kind of stuff, but not on engineering standards in general. And if you want to move with the growth of the organization, maybe do it to a different architecture pattern like microservices, it's really wise investing in those engineering standards right from the beginning. Because otherwise you have all these people joining, and in our case, 50% of the organization is less than 6 months old. They all come with their own background, their own ways of working, and their own sort of standards how to do stuff in the engineering world. And that might end up in the picture that Stephan showed earlier, right, with the burning bread in their hand, right? So you don't want to end up there. So investing in those standards, writing them down, and just communicating them, and also agreeing on them within the team, right? I mean, that's probably the most important point. How do we want to work together? How do we do stuff here in this engineering organization is super important. And the third learning is, think about architecture and tooling. So in our case, as I said, we're moving to a slightly different architecture now, which supports also the scale of this organization, moving away from a more monolithic system, which also works for big-sized teams. But in our case, we definitely made the choice to move away from the monolith, and thinking about this early on and the investments you have to take to move to such an architecture, because it just doesn't work by saying, okay, we do microservices now. You also have to invest and build certain capabilities, and that needs to be planned into the roadmap, planned into the team structure, and maybe, for example, invest early on in a platform team that builds those capabilities, right? How do I get my Docker container in production in a easiest way so that 80 engineers don't spend time every day thinking about this? Or how do we need an API gateway? Who's building this? Who's governing this? And these kind of questions. I think if you do this early on, then you save a lot of waste, and you can really enable the teams, the newly joining teams and newly built up teams to fully accelerate and move at a fast pace. So we haven't done that to the extent that we should. We started that, and it was also a capacity problem in our case, but We definitely learned from that, and we're now sort of full throttle on this topic. Also, a topic like CI/CD, right? Does my CI/CD pipeline support the new model, right, with all the developers coming on board, or are we stepping on each other's toes, right? So this is definitely an important learning. And next slide. Yeah, chaos and culture problems. So it's going to happen, right? You can't avoid it. Not every process is smooth, right? You will end up in situations where you say, "Oh my God, there's a developer joining next week. Which team is he in? Who is this, by the way? I don't know, right? Let's find him a buddy. Let's make the onboarding smooth." These kind of situations appear, right? And you have to deal with it. And also you have to tell candidates that are coming in at this phase of the company, look, not everything is perfect. There will be chaos. Can you deal with it or not? There's people that can't, right? And then it's a misfit at this stage of a company. So you have to have people joining the company that can live in such an environment and help to shape it, turn the chaos into order and actually into a positive thing, right? Because chaos usually means you can have a positive impact by turning chaos into something in a good order. And you need people that help you doing that, right? And not sit there and complain and say, oh, it's chaotic environment, I can't work here. So that needs to be clear also in the hiring process. And culture, you can talk about culture, right? But if you move from a 10 people team to a 100 people team, there's not much left of the culture, right? You basically have to build culture again from scratch, and culture is the people in the company. So you have to completely address this from scratch, from my perspective, right? I think these were the learnings, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think this is, we actually selectively took that picture as the ending picture for our talk.
So clean,
It's so clean, it looks so boring. This is where you then hopefully end up at one point in time, coming from that chaos part. But that's already it from our side. Thanks for listening. And I think, Toby, you're taking care of comments and so on and so forth.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much also from my side for this very interesting talk. A lot of learnings also from my side. So to the audience, I would like to ask the question. So if you have any questions, then just write them here in the channel, or you can also have the opportunity to grab the mic and have a direct conversation with us. But so far, I collected already a couple of questions. So maybe we begin with those ones, and then maybe some others will come up afterwards. So one question that one person asked was, did you use any HR tools along the way for the organization design modeling, skill management, etc., etc.?
Yeah, so on the tooling side, so we I think one of the biggest used assets is so-called our tech staffing sheet. It's simply a Google sheet where all the people that are currently in the company, potentially joining, and open vacancies are recorded. And this thing got pretty complex and pretty big, but that's sort of the source of everything, right? Because if you grow at this scale, as I said, we had situations where we had people joining next week and we didn't know about it because there was the process on the HR side wasn't smooth, right? So that sheet is our source of truth, right? And then obviously you need to visualize that. So we use Organimi for org charts. So we visualize our organization in an org chart tool, and we use for hiring Greenhouse, which is one of these standard talent acquisition tools. And you need that as well, right? Otherwise, you will end up in chaos because interviews, scheduling, interview feedbacks, it's all collected in there, offer management and so on. So that is super important. From an org design perspective, we basically obviously got inspired by my experience, right? Looked at different models in the market, but you have to design the org in a way that it fits your product, right, and your tech skills. So we have the luxury that we have full feature teams, more or less, cross-functional, but also full feature. So we don't split front and back end, but we have front end and back end people in one team. So they can build a whole product end to end, right? And that's really nice. So that drives then the org design, right? If you split differently, you have a different org structure, different org chart. So it's really company specific.
And maybe also to extend it a bit when it comes to tooling, I think we also heavily used Slack and some kind of workflows that you can use here, especially to let's say scale things of, okay, we need a tech buddy for somebody who is going to join next Monday. And by the way, it's Friday. So spreading out that message in like a controlled way and also enabling others to do that then. Yeah, so not just our tech people, but maybe also product people or QA, whoever is going to join and take a lead there. This is then again like providing the tooling part here. But not necessarily like a specific tool. I think Google Sheets actually did a pretty good job in that case.
Yeah, I think on the onboarding side, we could mention that because this is such an important thing, right? The onboarding process and having people join and feel like it's not complete chaos and they can get efficient very quickly. So we use a simple Trello board, right? We have a template and that gives you sort of tasks, right? As a new joiner, your first day, first week, 3 weeks or something, 90 days, right? And here's what you need to do, right? And here's the access to this system, and here's the person you should meet, and so on. So we standardize that in a Trello board. We just create a new board for every new joiner, and that is pretty efficient, I think, and gives also good experience.
And I think also the part of like setting up, so what we already did in the beginning phase was to set up like blockers for people you should definitely meet. So there was like a bi-weekly meeting for meeting all of the UX persons, for the product managers, for the agile leads, for the backend engineers, the front-end engineers, and so on and so forth. And this was a blocker. Everybody had its own calendar, and we just then added new joiners to that, which pretty much helped as well, because adding somebody is easy. Finding a meeting where everybody can fit together, that is like a pretty hard part. So whatever you can optimize there, think of that relatively early and just do it then.
Yeah, thank you. I think another question that came up is, the one thing you mentioned in the beginning of your talk was this tech playbook that you created, and one person actually asked if it would be possible to share that playbook. And for me, like a personal question also arises: how do I have to imagine this kind of thing? I had never heard of it before, to be honest. Can you describe what it is a little bit in more detail?
Yeah. So the where this came from is that sennder wasn't really a tech company, right? It was more or less logistics driven, right? And I thought, okay, let's write down how we think about product development, right? So we can also align with stakeholders and say, look, this is what I think a product manager does, right? A CEO, do you agree? A CEO, do you agree? So that's where it started, right? And then it became bigger and bigger. And we basically wrote down, okay, how do we envision the structure moving forward, the org structure, the pods, right? And it might be clear, but just writing it down and saying, okay, we have cross-functional teams. So they always have front end, back end, right? Do they have a designer or not? Is design a pool, or are they assigned to teams, right? So it triggers all those discussions, right? And if you start writing it down, you're getting to all those questions, and then you have to answer those questions. And suddenly you have this 30-page document that pretty much describes how do we work at sennder from an org perspective, and then also ways of working, right? So do we do all 2 week sprints, Scrum, or is it open, right? In our case, it's open, but we say, but you should have a demo every 2 weeks. Doesn't matter what you do in the team, but let's demo your working software every 2 weeks, right? And that's have these 6 weeks cadence where we do roadmap planning, right? Or quarterly, or whatever it is for your company. But writing it down and saying, okay, and what do we do there? So what do we demo? How does a demo look like? Is it slides or working software? Let's agree on working software and not slides, right? I think that helps a lot to answer a lot of questions. And writing it down is then also good guidance for future joiners, right? How do we work at sennder? So we're happy to share that. I think, Stephan, you were...
Yeah, I can just take care of that. So maybe I think you also have a tech block at sennder. So maybe this is like a very important thing to be published there to get an idea. And I think also I can just emphasize the importance of the document, because what was written there, like in the beginning of, let's say, April or March, this is actually what we are still building. And it's like a living document, so it got adapted over time, of course. But like the core that was written down there is actually what we have now. And it's like pretty amazing to see that as well, because it gives you like a clear guideline where to go. And then you just need to figure out how to get there.
Okay, very insightful. Thank you very much. Another person had the question, how many people actually had a previous industry expertise versus from outside industries? Do you have like a gut feeling how How many people?
Short answer is not many.
Okay.
The problem is in Berlin, there's not many logistics expertise, right? There's a few startups, but actually we have an agreement with the other startups in Berlin that we don't poach people from each other. So therefore, it's quite limited logistics background. In sennder in general, we have a lot of people with a lot of logistics background, but they're mostly in Eastern Europe, for example, or in other countries, but they're not tech people, right? So the tech people that joined, I think, except very few product managers, are non-logistics people. But that's okay, right? If you're passionate about it, about the product, you get into it, right? I mean, we have people in the company that know their business, and we can definitely link up people and learn from those, right? Now our moderator is gone. Is that good or bad?
No, I'm not really sure. We just continue. I can also share the LinkedIn afterwards. I think another question that I just saw was, how did Corona affect your recruiting and onboarding? I would say it positively influenced us, as we suddenly had access to people that you normally would not get in the market that easily. So I think a couple of our engineering managers, we actually found them because of Corona, because in their companies that they have been set on Kurzarbeit, so that definitely influenced us. I would say the onboarding, I mean, we switched to a complete remote setup anyways. So the onboarding was here, then bringing the right people together. So hey, look, we dedicatedly assigned people to become a tech buddy for a new joiner. And also having tasks for him or her to let's say being responsible for questions, anything, but also making sure that people have the right stack running, that everything is working smoothly. And this went for 6 months, roughly, that relationship. And of course, the interaction with the tech buddy became less and less. Next to that, I would also say one very important thing is to mention is the point of the academy. Also, sennder has an academy that happens monthly, and everybody is joining this academy. And this does not only mean sennder people, but it also means contractors, freelancers, whatever you have. They are going to join that to get a broad overview. This is sennder, this is our products. These are the products we are building. This is how we are working, operations people, and so on and so forth. And also there is an introduction to the, let's say, tech organization. But with that knowledge, you already have a pretty good kickstart, and you know people within the company as well because of lunches and everything that's organized there. And I think that definitely helped. But this academy was already happening before Corona times. Now it happened remotely, and before it just happened in one room there.
Yeah, there's one more question on the how to see if candidates can accept chaos or drive chaos, right? I mean, it's hard to really figure that out in interview process, but you basically look at previous jobs, previous profiles in companies and situations that they dealt with, right? And then you drive, you can have a few questions around it, but you basically have to look at what kind of environments they worked in. If somebody was 10 years in a corporate environment, probably not the right profile, right? If somebody worked in multiple startups, and I've seen good and bad times, right, and high growth phases, then that's probably the profile we're looking for.
Yeah.
And there's one question. We only have 1 minute left. So how complete is this recruitment now? So it's not complete, right? We're still growing quite a lot. We have just sort of redone a little bit our strategy. So we're expanding into new business models, and that will drive further growth next year, probably at a similar pace as this year.
I think also important to mention, so we are happy to answer more questions. So we will switch the medium now. I guess, Toby, you're going to...
sorry, by the way, I have internet connection problems. I hope that it was not too distracting. No. So we have the chance now to continue our discussions in Wonder. So I think it's all limited to 15 people. So first come, first serve. I will paste the link here in the channel, and then hopefully you can join if you want to.
Yeah, important to mention, there can more join, but only 15 people can speak directly. So then you have to wait until somebody pops out. And we are going to switch and go there as well.
Sure.
Okay, then thank you very much also from my side.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.